Hey folks, how's it going? Today I want to take a look at my Ultima weapons to see if I should reduce some and what fifth Ultima to work on. The first step is going to be to list my characters based on what weapon specialty they have. After that I want to look into character rogues to make sure they don't overlap with a possible Ultima mainhand, and for the main character I've got to take into account all the classes that share that weapon and their second specialties to see if there are better options around. The Ultima Ogi effect is just a 30% elemental attack up and a 30% double attack up after all. At the end of the day, I should have my answer. Beginning with my fire, I've got 5 sword and 5 melee characters, as well as 4 spear characters, 3 staff and 3 gun characters, so those are the weapons that are getting the first points. Moving on to water, 5 more sword characters, 4 staff characters which are probably going to become 5 or even 6 soon, 3 gun and 3 melee characters. I still wish I made it in time to spark Bajra, but she's going to have to wait for next year. Let's move on to Earth. The sword department is always packed, 5 more characters in here, 2 of which also share katana specialty. The 4 katana characters are also matched with 4 X characters, but I'm afraid Earth is the only element in which I could use an Ultima X. In Wind, I've got even more sword characters, 9, followed by 5 katana users, 3 melee and 3 staff users. I'm halfway hoping for Grimnir to come home on his own during my next spark, and that's the Ghost plus 1 for the moment. Next up is Light, with 6, hopefully 7 after June, sword characters, 4 staff, gun and melee characters and 3 spear ones. To close the list, Dark, with 5 sword, dagger and staff characters, 4 melee ones, 3 gun and spear ones and 2 katana ones. The total count amounts to 36 sword characters, 22 staff and melee characters, 17 gun characters, 16 spear and katana characters. But numbers are not all when you've got favoritism thrown into the mix, so let's go element by element to see which Ultima we've got to drop. Fire has to have its sword, spear and melee. Staff isn't so important and gun can be dropped. Water is going to need a staff and could put a spear to good use. I would also like a gun for Kokoro and a katana for Bajura. Earth can't give up his sword and would very much like a katana as well as an axe. Wind votes for sword, staff and melee as well. All its katana characters share a sword specialty anyway. Light would like a bit of everything, sword, spear, staff, gun, melee. Dark follows suit but swaps gun for dagger. With the votes now cast, we are at 5 votes for sword, 4 votes for spear, staff and melee, and 2 votes for gun and katana. Since I don't have Bajra yet, the only team I would be using a katana with would be Earth, while I could use a gun in all elements but wind. Should I ever add another Ultima core, I know where it's going, but now let's move on to picking the elements. Like I've said before, we've got to keep in mind the main character's other weapon specialties for this. So starting with the sword, the main character is also going to share an axe specialty on Berserker, spear specialty on Spartan, dagger specialty on Chaos Ruler, and katana specialty on Chrysaor and Glorybringer. What I'm looking for are weapons with good Ogi effects, especially team-wide double and triple attack buffs, boost to charge bar gain, unique buffs, and so on. Sometimes even a simple defense down can be alright as well, but I won't be taking into account gold moon weapons or class champion ones. So in fire, Berserker can keep running his Xeno X for the double and triple attack buff, the Dark Opus X with customized Ogi, or share a Shiva Sword with Spartan, which opens the main slot for the Shiva Spear and the Hollow Sky one. Chaos Ruler can run a Guild War Dagger, and katana wise there's the Xeno one, which is pretty good as well, so no Ultima Sword in fire. In water, there aren't many readily available swords. The Ice Claymore looks interesting, the Murgle can work for a defensive setup, but that's about it unless you want to use the EX slot for the Rose Queen weapon, which only gives a 15% water defense down on Ogi. In the dagger department, there's always the Guild War one, while spear and axes are kind of lacking. Katana wise, I'm really liking the newly released Ancestral Blade, and the Tsurumaru can offer a ton of delays on Ogi. Another thing to note is that Catalina's Ogi has the same effect of the Ultima weapon, and when running an Ultima Sword team, at least for me, she would most likely be present, so no Ultima Sword in water. For Earth, the Xeno Sword is actually a very nice defensive choice, but also the only sword choice the element has. The dagger selection is also pretty limited, leaving only the Guild War one as an outlier. No good spears, and the only interesting axe is the Hollow Sky one, that can't really substitute for anything. King's Katana can be interesting, but wouldn't have any good pairings when running on Chrysaor. An Ultima Sword would also synergize well with Alexia's passive, so Earth is the main candidate for it. Moving on to Wind, we got the Wind Hose, which is a fantastic weapon and plenty of buffers to make up for the Ultima ones. Dagger-wise, the Guild War one is always a great choice, only outclassed by the Love Eternal, or if you already have enough double and triple attack, the Reunion. Spear-wise, Grimnir Spear can work well as a Spartan main hand, especially if you're running Substitute. Other options would include the Dark Opus and the Xeno Spear. Wind suffers a bit X and Katana-wise, but that's of little importance now. Let's move on to Light, which got us with the Lone Swords with its Xeno and Dark Opus. Personally, I'm a big fan of the charge attack damage cap on these, since it also gives a 20% charge bar gain boost on Oogie, and I can't wait to complete mine. Dagger-wise, I'm starting to feel like a broken record for mentioning the Guild War one yet again. In the spear category, the one long spear is probably one of the best in the game, followed by the Eden, while X-wise, the Certificus rules the category. Light can also boast quite a unique katana, the one long one, buffing 10% light attack every time a green skill is pressed, going up to 50% and lasting 7 turns. Light has got some crazy weapon and doesn't need a sword. I'm crossing fingers for a Certificus now though. Just like Fire, Dark Berserkers have a little axe called Hermanubis at their disposal, giving them a bit of a smaller boost to attack but a boost to charge attack damage, as well as a team-wide double and triple attack buff. Zod-wise, the Blood Gang can be an interesting option for stamina teams, while the Hollow Sky Blade brings 2 more debuffs to the count for its extra damage. The Kiln Sword can also be an option when in pinch and missing some defense down. Moving on to daggers, that's the usual Guild War one, but this time it gets outclassed by the Parazonium, which instead of going 35% for double and triple attack, it adds a team-wide 15% echo. Moving on to the spears, the Cherubim's lance doesn't look too bad all considering, but Dark brings 2 great katanas to the table, the Xeno and Dark Opus ones. With all these options, and with Dark Jump buffing Dark Attack already, Dark can renounce to the Ultima Sword as well. The Ultima Sword can stay in its Earth form then. Next up is the Spear's turn. Spears share the Spartan class with swords, the Sage class with staves, and the Apsaras class with axes, so a lot of weapons that I've already covered. These should go way faster. Fire is already set, it's got the Shiva and Hollow Sky weapons for Spartan and Sage, and the Xeno Axe for Apsaras. Running an Ultima Spear team also means running Anila in it, so there's no need for an Idle Fire main hand. Water doesn't have good spears, no good spear specialty buffers, and Ultima Spear in here would be just to use in a team with Uno after his 5-star, but Spartan can run on an Ultima Zod team and Sage on an Ultima Steph one, especially since I'm planning to spark Europa next, so it's a hard call to go for a Water Ultima Spear. Earth has no good spear characters and has a very hard time moving away from Lexiel, the Ultima Sword is all it needs. Wind already has a good selection of spears and swords, I would say it's fine. Should Grimnir or Wind Heres come up, I would have a decent team as well. The same thing goes for Light with its insane swords, spear and axe. If Jean gets Erogi fixed, there won't be a need to run an Ultima Spear main end here. Dark-wise, an Ultima Spear team would be quite lackluster as the characters aren't so great, but even if they're gonna get buffed soon, I would still mostly just run them for fun, so I'm not too keen on getting a Dark Ultima Spear either. 6 elements and not one really needs it as a main hand. At this point I might really consider Water or Dark for it. Let's see if the Staff has a better chance of finding a home. Staff shares the Sage class with spears, the Warlock class with daggers, and stands alone on the Necromancer class, so there's a bit of a smaller overlap. Again, let's begin with Fire. An Ultima Staff team would run with Clarice, Megisa and possibly Zala Melina. Having all the buffs covered, I wouldn't use one as a main hand, preferring a Shiva Spear, Hollow Sky Spear or Guild War Dagger instead. In my Water Ultima Staff team, I'm probably going to want Altair, Europa and Lily, with Drang being a little bit an oddball, so I'm already covered buff-wise. As for main hand, I would love anything to speed up everyone's charge bars. Dagger-wise, the Guild War one is always a solid choice, and while there aren't any interesting spears, Water has a great assortment of staves, starting with the Hollow Sky one, the Xeno, the Blue Sphere and the Dark Opus, which also gives Lily more Deluge crests. Moving on, Earth doesn't really do Staff, unless you want to start taking the Evokers into account, but this would be the only case in which I would have to look for a good main hand other than a Guild War Dagger. Wind on the other hand can find a solid base for an Ultima Staff team in Monkey and Grimnir, then either Urius or Lena would be great pieces for its completion. Weapon-wise, it can rely on all its spears and daggers, even though that Mysteria and all its scepters makes me curious. Back to Light, I'm almost done grinding for 5th, and she's going to join Sarna's buff and damage cut while waiting on Light Clarice. Weapon-wise, Warlock can always run with its Guild War dagger, and Sage can run with the one long spear just fine. I don't really have plans to run Necromancer in Light, but even in that case, I've got a gun Bantane I can bar. This leaves Dark. I'm going to have to wait for the next Valentine or anniversary to get another shot at Clarice, but I'm a man of patience. Weapon-wise, I'm still lacking a Parazonium, so a Guild War dagger is my best choice for Warlock, the Cherubim Spear for Sage, and an Obscuritas for both. So the Ultima staff doesn't really fit as a mainland anywhere. My best choice would be to make it Light for the double attack buff, Dark to use as a decent main hand starting from next year, or Earth should I want to get Lobelia out of the Arcarum Evokers. Man, I didn't think trying to sort these things out would have been so difficult. Next up, we've got guns, and as far as I remember, there aren't that many good ones in the game. Guns share both Bandit Tycoon and Doctor classes with daggers, as well as bow class in Nighthound, while being on their own on Gunslinger, Mechanic and later on, Soldier. In order to avoid sounding even more like a broken record, Doctor with a Guild War dagger is an awesome choice in any element, and the main reason why some of these themes are even playable. Bandit Tycoon works alright as well for a bit more of an offensive option, so I'll mostly be looking into decent guns for Mechanic and Soldier. Let's start as usual with Fire. Only having a 4-star tier and some Rilsa, I'm not too keen into investing in this element's gun team, and the lack of double and triple attack up would prevent me from moving away from Doctor and a Guild War dagger. Even if the new Soldier bullets come out good, I would only be able to use a Guild War gun for it. The Ultima one would surely help, but I don't think it's worth it. Moving on to Water, the Echoes do a little bit of buffing on their own, but the little 5% triple attack up hurts them. The team needs more triple attack up, and that gun can't provide it. The lack of double and triple attack up weighs down Earth as well. I'm somewhat tempted to bar the AK-4A for Mechanic, but I'm going to wait for the Soldier's release first. Still, no Ultima gun here. I'm a bit sad for Wind. The element that used to run 7 guns in its grid has no gun characters. So we land on Light. I've been having quite a bit of fun with Doctor, Zoe, Silva and Song, and I've been trying, with no success, to run the Hollow Sky Bow as a main hand. The problem is always the same, low double and triple attack. In Dark instead, Freezy can bring a little bit of extra double and triple attack, but it feels too little, and in case I don't want to run a Guild War dagger, there's the Phantasma's gun, which provides similar bonuses. In the end, it's the 30% double attack up to stop the Ultima gun from becoming a good main hand. Hopefully, the Soldier class and the new bullets can bring some interesting new effects for it, which will make it a better choice than the Guild War dagger, and in that case, my eyes are on Fire and Light. The last weapon in the list is the melee one, standing by itself on Luchador and only sharing a katana slot on Ninja and Runeslayer. Eye-wise, Anila and Gandagosa bring enough buffs to the team, and the Shiva Fist with its 15% triple attack up can be the cherry on top. The Soval Gauntlet, while low on attack, can also be an interesting choice for its echo. Meanwhile, the Runeslayer can also count on the Xenoifrit Katana as a good main hand. In Water, depending on the occasion, the Wilhelm, the Swanwu Shellfist and Societ's Fan can all be great main hands, and there's no need to rely on Ultima. Due to the lack of Medusa and Yggdrasil, my Earth theme is a bit lacking buff-wise. The only good melee weapons around looks to be the Psycho Gauntlet, while katana-wise, the element can count on Kenshi Chigo Hirofuri. Earth might make use of an Ultima melee main hand, but the moment I get Medusa, that Ultima is going to get reduced, so I think I'm going to hold off on this one. Wind's melee characters are absolutely fantastic, and the Xeno Sagittarius Fist comes as one of the best weapons around. I'm not touching anything here. On the light side, Amira can provide all the double, triple attack and charge bar gain the team needs, but the only melee weapon worth something is the one long gauntlet. And katana wise, there's no other option than the one long one. I'm thinking Light can actually enjoy a Ultima melee main hand. Dark melee has been quite fun thanks to Cerberus and 6, and all the characters each buff their own double and triple attack. And while there are many interesting melee weapons outside of Cerberus's, the katana selection can offer a Dark Opus and the Xeno one. While the team seems like it's lacking on attack buffs, the Runeslayer can try to work on those, so I think I might skip on a Dark Ultima melee weapon. Looks like it's really going to go to Light. Alright then, this was way harder than it had any right to be. The result is that I won't have to remake my Ultima Zod, which is going to stay Earth element. The Ultima Spear can go to Water, since I'm expecting Zeta to get a test buff. The Ultima Staff's element doesn't really matter, but it can go to Light since that team even lacks a double attack buff. The Ultima guns element doesn't matter much either, but I'll wait for the soldier's release before looking back into this. Lastly, the Ultima melee finds itself with a lot of good alternatives in most elements, light being the only one falling behind, so this was a bit of an easier choice. Looks like I'm going to have to tear down and remake 3 of my Ultimas. Thankfully, none of these changes are urgent, so I can wait for mid-June to start this process. In the meantime, I'll just go back to farming for the 5th weapon and the material to craft the others. So that's it for the Ultimas. I hope this video was as useful for you as it was for me, and I'll see you guys around soon. Ciao!